We have an online presence, Josh?
Well, I mean, I just started it. Yes, we are using it, but that's,
No, I meant, are people already there?
one.
One?
We did see some shares today, so.
Actually, nine.
Uh-huh.
Nine.
Right.
And we're live, by the way.
Okay, we're ready to go?
Yep.
All right, then we're going to go ahead and call the Lewis Central Board meeting to order for August 3rd. Could you please take roll?
Ms. Atkins? Yes. And I'm noting in the minutes, Ms. Atkins is joining the meeting via telephone due to a conflict. Mr. Hendricks?
Here.
Mr. Houston?
Here.
Mrs. McDaniel? Here. Mr. Stopper?
Here.
Mr. Wyland?
Here.
Mrs. Shepherd?
Here. Can I get a motion to approve the August 3rd, 2020 agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Vote, please.
Ms. Atkins? Yes. Mr. Hendricks?
Yes.
Mr. Houston?
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Stopper?
Yes.
Mr. Wyland?
Yes.
Mrs. Shepherd?
Yes. Commendation and good news.
And Dave has a few things to share?
I do have a few things to share. I sent this to you today to your school email account. The first would be some highlights of how our AP kids did last year. It was a great year for AP, even though we had not such a great year to end the school year. Just to show you. Open it. Maybe. We had one student last year who was recognized as a national AP scholar. That was Spencer Cooper Ohm. He had 4s or higher on at least 8 or more exams during high school for AP. That's tremendous.
Wow.
I think it's impossible.
Apparently not.
Yeah. And then we also had 4 students who received scores of 3 or higher on 3 or more AP exams, so they're called AP scholars. And those are listed there. We had a 65% success rate for taking exams. There were 103 actually total enrollments. That's not total kids, that's total enrollments in AP courses this past year. Great results for kids. We continue to expand the offerings in AP, and kids are continually increasing enrollments in AP. So that's the first area. I can figure out how to get back to my other. There's also there we go. There's also a video that Michelle Cavars, our tag teacher, and Lorraine Dusman put together that where they did yard signs for students as well. And it's a great celebration, posted on Facebook, very nice. Also have a couple of things from softball and baseball. We had 1 softball member and 4 baseball players chosen for the academic all-conference team, which was great. And then we had first team and second team in honorable mention baseball players, and first, second, and honorable mention softball players listed there as well. And then Haley Bach, you guys following softball at all? She had quite the offensive season, we'll just put it that way. Tremendous, was chosen by KMA as the offensive player of the year.
Quite a few. I just wanted to add, to what Dave provided here. I know that a number of our board meetings were in attendance yesterday, but just kudos to Maddie Seek at the high school, of course, Dr. Vinoff and his admin staff, and also just the students and even the families. The graduation ceremony went off really without a hitch. Also compliments to the Mac Center. I think the way they approached how to socially distance attendees was very, very effective. I don't think there was one problem with how people were socially distanced. Kids were great. My only complaint was just the odd feel to a August graduation ceremony and looking out at students with with their faces covered by masks. Just put a little bit of an odd twist. Necessary. I'm not suggesting it wasn't necessary at all, of course, but just put a little bit of an odd twist. But can't say enough to the planning, the preparation, and just how everybody handled the ceremony. And congrats to all of our graduates who were able to attend.
Absolutely. I just wanted to echo that and say, as a parent of a 2020 senior, it was wonderful to have that closure, even though it was in August. And I agree with everything you said and want to thank all of the staff who took their summer to plan for it too. I know that was extra work, but I didn't hear a single complaint. All the parents I've spoken with since or seen comments on social media, it was all positive that it happened. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else commendation and good news?
Yeah.
All right, we'll go on to comments and suggestions from our audience. This is a portion of our agenda that you can ask questions or direct anything, comments to the board. Are there any online that have made comments? Okay,
No.
I'm getting a no. We will have a second time during our agenda before our action items. So if anyone who is tuned into the board meeting can type in their questions or what they would like to share with the board, and we'll address that at that time. All right, we'll go on to consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Do we have an updated personnel sheet?
We do.
So all is the same as your board packet, except for item F.
Okay. How many openings do we have? Do you know?
Openings,
Do
meaning
we have
still.
any teacher openings, any staff openings?
No, I
that we
think
still
as
have?
far as teachers, I think we're complete. I think we may still be, are we still short some parents?
Yeah, we're starting a para hiring process.
Yeah.
And there'll be a few nutrition services, obviously bus drivers, but otherwise, nothing out of the ordinary.
Okay. Is there any other comments or discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Hendricks.
Yes.
Mr. Houston.
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel. Yes. Mr. Stoffer.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Ms. Atkins. Mrs. Shevlin.
Yes. We'll go on to our agenda, reports.
Okay, this, as I informed the board, not a formal multi-hour report as 2 weeks ago, but I just think it's important to kind of keep the board and the community informed as we go along, because our situation with return to learn is fluid. I've been saying that to the community, and I'll continue to say it. We never know what we're going to come into each day, whether it's new guidance that's released, whether it's a proclamation from the governor, whether it's the DE interpreting something, or all of the above. And sometimes all of those things don't exactly jive with each other. So there gets to be a little bit of an issue. So I want to just hit some of those high points, but I want to start by asking Dave to just talk to us a little bit about the registration process. We started the registration process, I always say via online, because when I say online registration, I think people think we registering online, which there's a component of that. But we're in the process today. We had our first in-person session. So I'll just let Dave give you the numbers and kind of where we're at, including how we're tracking on the request for online, and I'll add on some more.
Sure, this is going to be very short. We are about 2/3 done with registration, even though today was really the only on-site registration opportunity we have. Until today, we were actually a little ahead of the pace, but today, being the on-site one, our turnout for the on-site, we tried to distribute over multiple days, and today was kind of light, which is part of what we intended to have happen from a socially distancing perspective. We actually have some numbers for you. We have 2,984 students in Power School that we expect to register. Now, some of those might have moved to other places, and we haven't gotten transfer requests yet, et cetera. And there will be new students also added to the mix that aren't part of that. But right now, there are 2,984 students. 2,024 have submitted registrations, and 1,891 of those have been fully processed by the registrars in the buildings and delivered into Power School, back into Power School, so data are flowing in a nice updated kind of fashion. Specifically, interest in the remote learning components. We asked 3 different questions in the remote learning piece. One is anyone in your household at risk for COVID? Or is the child at risk for COVID? And that was a yes/no question. We asked if the child had a circumstance that would keep them out of school and where we would reach out to them for their interest in remote learning. And we asked a question about their internet at home, whether they had high-speed internet. And that middle question is the one that kind of took on another meaning with the most recent governor's proclamation. Before, you needed to have a documented health concern, and so there was this if it was the right thing for the child. That is being interpreted now to basically mean a choice on the part of parents, pretty much straight up now. And so we're interpreting it that way at this point in time. With that, of the 1,891 that have been processed, 244 have said yes, and they distribute as listed on the screen. I can make that a little bigger for you. It represents about 12.9, well, exactly 12.9% of those that have registered. The distribution is there across the building, so it looks like 5th grade is winning that race right now. There are more 5th graders whose parents have asked to be considered for remote learning than any other grade in the system. We also asked, part of that question wasn't just yes or no, but it was, we gave them a chance to say, well, I really don't have any choice yet. I don't know whether I will or not. And that adds another 412 students into that mix, which is about 22% of the submitted applications. So overall, we're at about 1/3 of our families either say yes to online or I'm not sure at this point in time. The way we're going to proceed with this is we're going to treat the yeses as if they, we're going to put together online opportunities for all the students. For the I don't knows, we're going to communicate with them and give them the opportunity then to tell us more. We're going to assume they're coming to school unless they reach back to us and say, well, I made a choice now, I want to be considered or not. Okay, so
Yeah, I think what's important to point out, and thanks, Dave. Dave has done a great job of monitoring and getting the registration set up. And keeping me posted. What we're, obviously, the definite yes is, as soon as possible, we're gonna have our principals in our buildings go to work on delivering how it is that those children would get an education. As I've tried to explain, I get a lot of calls and people want to say, can you tell us specifically how that's going to look so I can make a decision? And unfortunately, while we are committed to working with families, and as Dave said, especially after the governor's proclamation, which, by the way, just as a side note, there's a piece of legislation, Senate File 2310, which doesn't quite align with everything of the governor's proclamation, so we've had to reach out and take guidance from the DE and legal counsel. But regardless, we need to be able to plan. And so I think going forward, Dave and I were talking about this just earlier, we will probably have to reach out to those I don't knows pretty quickly as we're getting through this process and say, we remain committed to working with you, but we have to give you a deadline. And I think that, you know, there may be people that want to wait until the day before school to decide whether the child's going to show up in person or online. We have no ability to be prepared for that in the masses. So we're going to have to make an effort. I think, as Dave mentioned, we'll follow up with them and say that, you know, who they should contact, and that if we don't hear from them, we're going to set them up as in person. The other thing we're probably going to have to consider for these folks that I'm sure some would think they'd like it to be another way, but we're going to have to ask, as we're offering an online component, we're going to have to ask for a commitment from the families, because it will be a real nightmare for us to you know, start a kid this way and then have the mind change 2 weeks later, then they're in this mode. We'll be dealing somewhat with that by potential absences because of exposures and whatnot. We get that, but we're going to have to control what we can control. So we would probably ask for a commitment of at least a trimester. I think depending how we tackle it, there's multiple ways in our, for instance, just a real easy example we use all the time. If when we analyze our CREF numbers, if there are, and I'm hypothetically saying this, but if there are 20 kids that families want online education for 20 kindergartners, we're probably going to pull a teacher and have one teacher have a 20 child online. I shouldn't say probably, that's one way that we can handle it. That makes some sense. Our ability to shift that mid-year is almost impossible without really throwing a curve at all the other teachers and numbers and where the kids aren't acclimating them to their classroom. So in that case, we may actually ask for a year in a situation like that. So, but as I have to tell people, these numbers start first, and then individually we'll start working on what the process is and what the opportunity is. In some cases, it may be that kids are online watching, either recorded or live, the same thing that a teacher is teaching live. That's the you know, probably the idea for maybe if there are 1 or 2 kids in a class. And as I said to our teachers at our last board meeting, we're not going to ask teachers to teach all day in an in-person setting and then turn around and log on at night and teach, you know, another caseload of students all evening. I don't think that's right. I don't think they signed up for that. And I think we'd have some contractual concerns if we tried to force that. So we need to be realistic, and they have families of their own as well. So we have to understand the numbers and the grades. Again, Dave is tracking that for us, and every day we get a little closer to having a better picture, but we'll go to work on that. So that's our process. I also wanted to just comment on some of the, I feel like I'm yelling because I want to talk through my mask, and I'm actually getting out of breath. I'm talking so loud. You think it's coming through okay, Josh? Okay. You know, the other, I kind of base what I want to share with you on the kinds of calls and questions that I get. It's really hard for people to understand the dilemma that schools have right now and the kinds of things that we are dealing with. But there are questions about, a lot of people still are requesting that we consider 100% online. Start the year off. You've now got a system, you weren't prepared for it in March. We know that. We admitted that along with every other school district in the country. We weren't prepared for a closure, but we're much more prepared for that now. But I have to remind people, this board, this superintendent has no control to determine that our district is going to do that. We can request it through an application, but we've been told in pretty certain terms that will probably be rejected unless there's a extreme extenuating circumstance. I assume that means a very high positivity rate. Our positivity rate is tracking in 14 days at about 7.4% in Pot County.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Polk County is higher and Urbandale was just denied their extension.
Yes. So there are some battles going on around the state. There are some districts that have dug their heels in and have said we are going 100% online, and they're kind of waiting to see, as all of us are, waiting to see how the DE, Department of Education, will respond to that. There's a whole plethora of things they could do, from funding to disqualifying their attendance. But we don't know. I'm not saying that as an expert. We really are guessing, so we have to wait and see. But right now, it's not a question of should we do that. It's a question of it's not an option to do that. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. The other thing I get a lot of questions about are why aren't we considering a hybrid? And there's a lot of confusion about what a hybrid really is. And I notice when I talk to people, a lot of them, even on the professional side, a lot of times teachers think that they don't realize that you're not teaching one day and then you're online one day, then you're teaching one day, then you're online one day. To meet the rule, which what they've analyzed, and this is another thing that wasn't spelled out in the governor's proclamation, but they have tried through Senate File 2310 and some guidance afterwards to clear this up, that schools can choose a model that you have 50% of your students in person attending for 5 days over the course of a 2-week period. So basically that's an every other day thing. The catch to that people forget is when they're not in attendance, they're not off. They're required to be logged in and learning online. So the district is responsible for attendance on those days, and quite honestly, and I don't mean this with any, I'm not referring to any other district, but when we look at it, the idea of having our teachers, as we talked about earlier, teach 50% of their students in person in a traditional setting, at the same time teaching the other half, or whatever that increment is, online. And then the next day, they're doing the same thing, it's just that the two groups of students are reversed. So we think that's a significant task to ask our teachers. Initially, the real reason, the primary reason for the hybrid model is to get fewer students in your building so you can socially distance at the 6 feet. For us to do that in LC, we're not a huge district, but with 3,000 kids and 4 school buildings, we would have to divide our students into thirds if we really wanted to get there in a perfect scenario. And to do that, we wouldn't meet even the state's guidelines of 50%. So it's problematic. As we put in the return to learn plan, when we looked at the idea, the other issue, there's 2 other issues that we think are big for our community. I've heard from a whole lot of parents that say over and over again, don't create something that causes a daycare issue that's inconsistent. so parents trying to figure out what you do with your children on this day, and then this day, and this day. But the other thing is, we really think that of all the options, that option would be most detrimental to our academic curricular efforts, because we think it would slow down the academic progress with kids being in person every other day, and possibly it could even cut it in half. It just would be a real challenge. So that's something that we conceptually talked about up front. We have not and did not, and again, first, it's confusing. We were told that that was off the table, it wasn't an option. And later, we were told just recently that, well, you can, but you have to follow these parameters. So we haven't looked at a hybrid for those reasons. I want everyone to understand the challenges with the types of guidance we are getting. And when we need answers, and when we call the numbers, whether it's the DE or the governor's office, our local AEA helps as much as they can. Sometimes we have to call public health, sometimes we have to call our own attorney. But more often than not, we can't get answers for the questions we ask. I'm going to give you a simple example of the kind of guidance we give. We've received guidance about football games. Now, the governor's office and the DE say, talk to the athletic association. Get your guidance from them. The guidance from the athletic association specifically tells us that we must make sure that we socially distance those involved in coin toss at center field before a game. How many people do you have out of the coin toss? I mean, maybe 4 captains from each team, the officials, sometimes some, I've been out of the coin toss for, some kind of symbolic thing. But we've received zero guidance about what to do with the community filled stands. So they say, well, you have to figure that out because your stadium may be different than next door stadium. So no guidance. So we have to then decide something that for some people will be very popular with the community, for other people, depending on what we do, will be very unpopular. We get the calls either way. So that's just an example, and that's kind of almost a little bit of a humorous one, but that's an example of the contradictions we have that we deal with. I'll give you another example that we dealt with today. I have dealt with nothing today, nothing that was on my agenda, other than, I'm smiling underneath here, by the way. I wish you could tell it. But levity, but all I've dealt with today are positive cases of COVID. And staff and students, and how we are to respond. Andrea and I, and a few other people spent the majority of our morning trying to get answers of who is considered by our state government an essential employee in the school district. Is a food service worker an essential employee? And it's frustrating when nobody can tell you that answer. No one. And public health, they're working night and day trying to help us. But when they say, is this an essential employee? Because if it is, you're going to do this. If it's not, you're going to do this. And I say, can't you tell me that? No, we're not going to tell you who an essential employee is. That's from the governor's office. We can't get the governor's office to answer. I finally got public health to advise that they thought we should treat this as an essential employee. The guidance provided by the state says that our employees can be considered critical employees. And in a meeting last Friday with superintendents and DE representatives, we asked if critical was synonymous with essential. And we were told they would get back to us. Second half of the day, dealing with a LCLC, Lewis Central Lucky Children summer daycare program, having to quarantine a whole classroom because there was a positive exposure of one of the students. This is a young student. I don't want to, breach anything and talk about who the student is or even age or anything like that. Just the point is, we're not in school, we're in summer, and we've had sports programs shut down. We've had employees quarantined, and now we have a classroom in our daycare quarantine. So it's a challenging situation, and I've told countless people, I've said this to Andrea, I feel so bad. I like to be the superintendent that people walk into my office, and when they're feeling down, by the time they leave, they're smiling and chipper. And the first time in my career, I feel like I'm the guy that's making them leave with their head hanging just even a little lower, because I don't have answers to all of these things that we're dealing with. What I do know that I think we have to understand, that I want our community to understand, you can look at our situation, and most people gravitate to, is COVID a serious thing? And the conversation becomes, is it real? And one side of the conversation, can people really get sick? And can people really die? And is that still going to happen? And the other side is, it's a hoax. And we deal with that. We deal with people that want to tell us you're doing this and it's not good because of this, and the opposite. But if you take that off the table, that's honestly not what is causing the difficulty in planning right now. What's causing the difficulty in planning is the structure that we are putting in place to deal with all the things relative to COVID. And as I describe it, I feel like it's by design, not intentionally. It's like a house of cards. And I think my biggest worry is what we have the potential for dealing with is a shortage in our staff. And one example is our bus drivers. We spent all last year trying hard to get bus drivers, and I can't tell you how many days we had custodians driving buses. I don't think that's a new practice. I think LC's done that in the past. This year, when I already know in the summer, we're quarantining employees. Now, how we can fully populate our buildings with student staff and suddenly we're not having to quarantine employees, I don't see that as feasible. So it's the structure underneath. That may not worry you if you don't think COVID's a big thing. It may make you very worried if you do. But regardless of how you feel there, it's very real that we have to deal with a call at 5 o'clock in the morning. If my phone rings, and it's probably going to be Randy, because our transportation director is calling him saying, we're minus 10 drivers today. There's no way we can function. So the guidance from the state is, I go online 5 in the morning, I fill out an application to dismiss school. I can't call the board president and ask for guidance or say, hey, let's see what we need to do here. It's a tricky situation. And then I have to wait 48 hours for somebody to get back in touch with me. So the option then is we just call school off like it's a snow day, but chances are we're gonna have to make that day up because the DE did not approve that closure. I think we just need to understand, and I would love to paint a wonderful rosy picture. And I think that we are pouring our heart and souls into trying to accommodate families and create the most mitigated structure possible for a school setting. I think one of the biggest things this board has done is the utilization of masks. Public health does tell us that their concern drops significantly when we're requiring masks. But when the summer days are still filled with us having to quarantine people and we have not even populated our schools, I expect I'll get one of those calls at 5 o'clock in the morning about transportation. And what do we do? I asked help in a superintendent's meeting with DE representation, what do we do when that happens? And the suggestion to me was, well, that would be a pretty easy fix. The easy fix would be that we just communicate with those students, we tell them that they'll all learn online that day. Which means then in a split moment, we've got to contact teachers and say, hey, there's, and I'm making this up hypothetically, there's 130 kids that we can't get to school today. So you need to shift and make sure that you're educating them online while you're educating all of the children. So I don't know that we have a fix or a solution for that. We do understand that there will be kids that will be sick. We've been thinking, Dave uses the term break the click, but that's a whole different meaning. When at 5 o'clock in the morning, you're trying to shift gears that this large volume of students are not there. Not to mention the hardship on parents. Because when you tell them there's not a snowflake in the sky, they're not thinking, oh, superintendent maybe sent out a call today. That's a realistic possibility every day as we go into the school year. And that doesn't even get into our teaching faculty. There's also a subshortage. They've tried to make it easier in the state of Iowa, which is, I learned something about sub requirements in the state of Iowa. And the way they've made it easier in Iowa, it's still harder to become a sub in Iowa than it is in other states. Most states, you have to have 60 credit hours of a college degree and fill out an application with the school district, and the school district can decide to utilize you as a sub. Here, there's an additional class that has to take place for the certification process through the VOEE when it comes down. So I'm going to wrap up by just sharing that a lot of phone calls I get, understandably so, are people that want to hear guarantee type language from me and from the district. They want to know that we're not going to have exposures, that we're not going to have quarantines, that we are perfectly socially distancing, and I have to be honest, it's not that kind of a perfect scenario. It's just not. And I thought long and hard about these words today because some people could be disappointed that I'm being dishonest. I'll end by saying that if the state were allowing local control for 100% online, I would be recommending that to the Board of Education. And I say that, again, I'm not inviting the political commentary from the outside. Take that off the table. The structure that sits on our shoulders to make work is a structure that looks about like a house of cards. And that's nothing to do with how we're going to do things. It's the variables that affect the planning that we put in place. We've had solid planning, but the variables that can just pull the rug out from under that in a moment's notice is alarming to me. And it's unsettling to me, and it worries me. And when you add to that, that I have genuine concern from staff members and from people who either believe one thing or don't know what to believe, but they're emotionally upset and concerned. So it's just, we are trying to create a way forward in an impossible situation. Definitely nothing I've ever had to lead through. We're doing, I think, a good job. I think we're doing the best we can. I think we have great principles. We have ideas to mitigate to the best of our ability, but it will not be perfect. And I think one way or the other, schools are going to be forced to look at the online possibility by default at some point. The state is going to have to review that, which they are right now from a legal perspective. There are schools that have made that determination. So I'll be quiet and let board members comment, but I felt that's my update kind of on what we're working on now and how we're marching toward the start of school. We're preparing for it. We're getting all the ducks in a row. We're ready to receive kids. We're going to start marching through the online. request and keep working with families and keep that commitment. But it's a challenge every day, and it will be all the way up to getting kids here.
Do any board members have any comments or questions?
So with the governor's proclamation that it doesn't have to be a medical, do we anticipate that we could see some shifts to skew that online number even later?
Well, that's already understood in what we worded the online information that went out to make it consistent with that. So I think those numbers that Dave is reflecting already have that in there. I think that's a lot of the I don't knows. It's people that, and based on the calls I get, I think people understand that as an option. So I think that's already why if you add the I don't knows and the 12.9%, as Dave said, that's about a third of our population that potentially could want to be online. And a third will be very, very difficult to manage from a financial perspective. But I think at the end of the day, the 12 to 15% is what we've kind of expected all along, probably end up there. That's what we've prepared ourselves to deal with. But, and again, there's some challenges to that because there are some districts that feel because of some later interpretations and what's said in Senate File 2310 that you can challenge families and only accept those that truly have documented health concerns. We opened that door a little further in LC because we wanted to keep a commitment to our families and the worry that's out there, and we're still committed to making that work.
I have a question in regards to how you said that any day you could have an emergency to where we can't get kids to school who want to come, and we don't know what this is going to do. How nimble are we? Do we have the procedures in place to move directly online with, I can't say missing a beat, but relatively smoothly?
I feel like Dave probably has some input on this, and Josh, who has just been an all-star for us working on this since the spring. I feel confident in saying that I think we're prepared to switch from brick and mortar to an online. All students, I think we could do that relatively quickly.
Yeah, one of the problems we'll have is issuing Chromebooks, getting Chromebooks into kids' hands. We'd have to send Chromebooks home with kids for them to be prepared the following day for the vast majority of them. So 1 or 2 days is very manageable.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Dave. I want to share with the board. I asked a question about that 5 o'clock in the morning scenario that I mentioned earlier. And another superintendent spoke up when the answer was, just be prepared to go online immediately. Now that doesn't mean all 100%. That means those that didn't make it in on the bus. And so another superintendent asked the question, so should we tell our kindergartners to carry their Chromebooks back and forth to school? Now, I believe that was said a little facetiously, but the answer was yes. That's not feasible. That's simply not feasible to expect that kindergartners are going to carry Chromebooks back and forth to school every day. It's definitely not perfect. That's for sure. So, but I think the idea of if the time comes where we're going 100% online, compared to last March, we are light years beyond where we were when that happened last March. And that won't be the issue. The bigger issue are these unexpected sudden numbers that then are thrown upon our teaching staff to do the simultaneous alignment of both We're not talking about, well, okay, you've got a whole day worth of online classes, then you have 5 kids that we're gonna sprint through your day. We're gonna help them get, log in. That's a lot different than suddenly you've got, in just one given day, 35, 40 kids that you're not teaching throughout the day that normally are there. Now today, you gotta think there's not being. It's complicated.
We work through all the social distance that we can manage through all of our common areas.
I think our teachers are getting creative. I think it's the pediatric guidelines that state if you're using masks, then you push for 6 feet, but anything from 3 to 6 feet with mask is a pretty good scenario. Our teachers are anxious to get into classrooms and figure out how they're going to adjust them. But for instance, our middle school principal, Mandy Reynolds, went around with a tape measure to all of her classrooms, and she was really excited that, there was more she felt she could get done than she originally thought. But I'll liken it to graduation. Graduation was a socially distanced experience. Very much so. Not when you walked outside, after though. So, we can work on keeping kids socially distanced in classrooms. I've even relaxed people and worried about, we probably all would like to take a mask break right now. I know mine feels, I think I have some condensation building up on my mustache. But, all those kinds of things can happen, but it's the tough part is the kids maneuvering the building, especially in our secondary schools. That's where, creating socially distanced hallways in secondary schools, even with half of the population, kids are going to clump. It's just what they do. So that's where I think we're concerned the most, and where that's why we think the masks are the best mitigation effort to keep them on students. And I applaud the board for their interest in that.
When will you have more details on like the teachers and how they configured their rooms? Are they going to be allowed to do that, or is the
Yes.
district, or are we going in to help, get that?
Well, we're offering any assistance. I mean, for instance, if they suddenly decide that, there's furniture in my room that I don't need anymore and it's in the way, we'll help them get that out of there. Randy will magically make that happen. And, I'm smiling here, Randy.
So why?
But, again, a lot of them are contacting the principals. They're just anxious. Really, after our last board meeting that happened, our principals got a number of calls they shared with me that teachers that were just interested in getting in and seeing what they could do. So we're going to leave some autonomy there because we know it's not something we can go around and measure all 6 feet in every desk. That's just, we don't have the ability to do that. But we'll be there to help with what they need. And again, we've offered PPE. At one time early in the planning, we talked about the possibility of protecting teacher workstations since they've got kids coming in and out, especially in the secondary schools. And the feedback we received back through our principals and their building level teams were that they prefer the option of having face shields along with masks. So Andrea's been ordering and working through. Is there a question?
Check your diagnosis.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to address it or you want me to. Sorry, we don't have the subtle communication down yet.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, so what Josh and I were talking about, like last time, we didn't know if we wanted to have dialogue back and forth, or if we wanted to answer questions that come in through the next comment suggestion.
Well, I think since we're talking at this point, we could go ahead and address that.
I think the question is pretty simple. I think someone was asking for clarification about, did I say I'd rather do online? I won't word it that way. I would rather have all of our kids in our schools, attending football games, doing schools we normally would do it. What I did say is that under the current requirements, the guidelines, The concern, and predominantly my number one concern, is the ability to maintain staff and all of our employee groups. Bus drivers is probably my highest level of concern, but that includes teachers, because we are currently, already throughout the summer, we've been quarantining staff, requiring them to go home and stay there, and that's before we populate the building. So my answer to that is, not that I prefer it, my answer is that if that were something possible from the state, because of those things, it would probably be my recommendation for the board to consider that.
Are there any other questions, comments about the return to learn report?
We'll update the board. I'll have another update in 2 weeks, and of course, I'll keep my weekly updates coming if there's any major changes.
Yeah, I guess as a parent, I would want to know more specifics, and so as we get those to communicate out to other parents, because, I'm thinking, okay, when it's mask break, where's the mask gonna go? Because I've been trained on how to don and doff your face mask, and how's that going to look? And so things like that, I think, would be beneficial in easing parents' minds on what a typical day would look like when we get to that point, because everything's fluid and we're still trying to figure it out.
It's a good time to make a reminder that our online, which we return to learn page, which is lewiscentral.org/RTL 2020, that is a fluid document as well, and we'll continue to populate that with more and more detailed information. It won't get fully into the precise weeds and everything, because that would end up being a very, very large volume, but the more detail that we add to how our principals are working through the social distancing efforts and such. We have looked at, right now, our principals are kicking around an idea that we may announce sometime later this week to better train our kids as they come in, in segments about things like masks, just acclimating to a socially distanced school.
Okay.
What prevents us from teaching to a camera?
Well, I think to some degree, I don't know that anything prevents, maybe technology a little bit. We worry about the quality of what a regular laptop, for instance, is going to provide for a student on the other end. But in some cases, Brian, that may be exactly how we are handling it. Without requiring a teacher again to double up. If in a teacher's caseload, they have over the course of the day 5 or 6 students that are online, and say one teacher, instead of having that teacher then finish the day and then enter into an online world and start working and teaching those students, it may be very possible that the way we handle that small number of students for that teacher is that they can simultaneously be either logged in and watching, or watching a recording, and then using Google Classroom to submit assignments and such. So that's one of the ways we may tackle that, but not large numbers.
Most of our classrooms aren't equipped with cameras to be able to record the teacher doing her classroom stuff, so it's not practical to record off of a laptop. So we have to have cameras if we're even thinking about it.
It'd be recorded in conjunction with the online platform of Google Classroom. So any documents that were shared, or any graphs, or anything that may be on the screen is also part of that.
But I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
If I'm here and my work is on a whiteboard that I'm working in front of and teaching to, we're not set up to project that.
And the reason I brought it up is I've been asked that by a couple of folks, that many universities are going, they're having lecture classes, kind of online, and I just wanted to make sure that was out there. So I think that's kind of the concept I think that most people are thinking of when they think of online.
Yeah.
We also do have Edgenuity at the high school level that has a lot of curriculum embedded in it and uses free develop videos and all that kind of work. The high school level is going to be a little easier to shift a little more quickly. The difficulty becomes at the elementary level especially.
I think each first grader has to be by computer.
Yeah.
That's not a game.
Yeah.
Appreciate all your efforts, all of the administration and staff efforts, taking us on board when numbers come along and the impossible situation. Information is
Yeah, it's an ongoing situation where you can make an announcement and you appreciate the kudos you receive for that announcement, but they're absolutely neutralized by the other end. And you can switch back and forth. You know, what seems reasonable and logical to one group seems preposterous to another group, and vice versa. It's a tough battle, but we're in for it, and we're inching forward each day and trying to get this to see where we go. While we know it continues to change, and we monitor the state level, and what some other districts are doing is they're challenging the state. We'll see how things change.
And we have hit August, so
Yeah.
this is the month we'll be
Yeah.
finding out. Okay. Anything else we can go on? from
Ready to move on.
reports? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and start with our discussion items. 7.01 ERC door access control bids.
I'm gonna have Dave, lead this with the information he's provided, but just to share what I shared with the board in my weekly update last week. This is definitely a byproduct of COVID. We're trying to make our buildings all, even ERC, where we can better control outside folks coming in. 90% of the time, we view that as a security measure for things like safety and security relative to horrific events that have happened around the country, and that's definitely a big component of what a buzzer system and a locking system and camera system is all about. This building, of course, I don't have the history some of you do, but I know that the intent, even the way it was designed with the window and the vestibule, was for that to be in place, but we have none of that in place. There are some measures that we need. We're very community feel here. I noticed that when I was interviewing and coming up. About anybody can walk in the front door and find yourself walking back around the cubicles and anywhere else. So we're moving forward. I also mentioned, David was saying more than I probably should be let you do this, but we had to make some adjustments at CREF too, but it was within the limits financially that decisions I can make. We didn't need blended board. We've had nothing here at the ERC, so we're starting from scratch. All right, Dave, that sets you up there to take it home.
Perfect. We saw bids from three vendors. We secured bids from two of the vendors. We're looking at the two exterior doors, the front door and the north door, and then three interior doors, the door to the main office complex, the safe, and the IT closet. That's it. Any questions?
Is it like a card reader?
Yes,
Stuff like
there'll be four grand screen devices so that any of the office pool could buzz a person in from the outside or buzz a person into the main part of the office,
Okay.
either one. There'll be a video conference, the card reader on the front door so that you swipe your card and get in, or you push the button and video conference with one of the folks in the office.
So that interior door right over here will have a buzzer on it.
Yes, the secure door, the door right outside of Eric's office.
So what would prevent somebody from just jumping over the?
There's nothing that would prevent them from jumping over that's true.
Randy is having plexiglass installed there, not really for that purpose, but I guess that would that would at least, deter their efforts a little bit and just jump over. But I'd like, from that standpoint, we have the control of determining if someone is, seems to be here with the wrong intent. Hopefully, we can pick up on that they're gonna come in here and jump over counters. We wouldn't let them in the first place. But from a COVID perspective, if we are setting up where we can keep people in the lobby and without them having the option to just navigate on.
Any other questions, discussion? All right, thank you. We'll go on to 7.02, policy updates relative to COVID-19, second read.
No changes from, as these were presented the last time. These were all relative to the recent legislation, as I've mentioned often, and how it impacted our policies. And so there's not been any updates or changes since they were presented on first reading.
Is there any discussion? Okay. We'll go to 7.03, policy 203.7, update, first read.
So this is the board member conflict of interest policy, which I actually have asked our legal counsel to review on this one because we did have a current situation where it was impacting a position that was of a small amount of money, a coaching position. And additionally, there are issues that we even think through, as I said earlier, our need for potentially having substitute teachers, so on and so forth, all those kinds of things. And having our attorney review, he was adamant that we go way beyond law on this, and he thinks it should be aligned to Iowa law. There's a specific line, as I stated in my update that I sent out on Friday. There's a specific line that talks about board member spouses, and I have to admit that this is new to me too, where I'm not used to that being an issue. The only thing I'm used to is that board members have to abstain from any kind of a vote for a spouse, but that is not required by Iowa law. So this is a first read, by the way, but this first read does not have that in there. As you can see in the policy, it also changes the amount of money. If there's a service that the district may take on, and it's relative to somebody that maybe the board member may have used, that limit is consistent with law, and this recommendation is no greater than $6,000. It's $2,500 in the existing policy. So it's a first read. We can definitely have any considerations to run back by legal and to see where that stands going forward. And we did start, I know you and I talked about the ISB review, and that is, I'll have the precise answer about that comparison before we do the second read.
Okay.
But they are starting that process right now. They've asked for us to submit all of our policies in order and such. So we're organizing what those things are. We'll find out if there's something much different. But due to the scenario, it made sense to have our own legal counsel look at that and advise the board. So that's the policy that's recommended on first read. We'll revisit that again.
Is there any discussion? Okay. All right. We'll go on to 7.04, Architects Amendment Agreement.
So this was, as you know, when we entered into our construction projects, we were not initially planning on purchasing property that we figured out became available to us. That's the FAA property. Most folks don't realize that we now own that little triangle of land. but that gave us 3 parcels between the high school, the middle school, and the new property. And along with our construction projects, it started becoming evident that aligning the zoning for certain requirements, like things like the fly loft and the auditorium and even the parking and also the pit area in the theater. So that process was not included, and our architects and engineers did work through that rezoning with the city and getting all the documents prepared, doing the title work. And so this is the amendment to the contract to include this work.
Is there any discussion? So now our entire property will be zoned the same.
Well, it goes to the city. It went to the commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and it's approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. It goes to the city council. It's this month. I don't know the exact date. It goes this month, and there are no anticipated concerns about that. It was warmly received and recommended by the Planning and Zoning.
Any discussion? All right. 7.05, late file open enrollment request. A and B, do we have 2?
We have 2.
Okay. And this is closed session per Iowa Code. What is the Iowa Code?
You don't have to have it in there?
Yeah, I know, I was looking at the paper. Iowa Code 21.51A, closed session is appropriate to review or discuss records which are required or authorized by state or federal law to be kept confidential, etc. And so I will need a motion to go into closed session.
I'll move.
Any further discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Husting,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel, yes. Mr. Stopper,
Yes.
Mr. Wiley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. session, and our next item on the agenda is comments and suggestions. This is the second time of our agenda that anyone can address the board. Do we have anyone? All right. We go on to action items. 9.01 ERC door access control bids.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the Prime Communication bid, PRC door access controls, amount of $20,882.37.
Any discussion? How soon will this get in?
I talked to Dave Keene today about that. He was inquiring about whether we can get a decision yet.
Okay,
I don't know that it will make the beginning of the school year.
okay. All right. Okay, vote please.
Mr. Stocker,
Yes.
Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel, yes, Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.02, policy updates relative to COVID-19 on the second read.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion for the board to approve the policy and updates included in the sign up.
Any discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Stocker, Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.03, policy 203.7, update on the first read.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion, the board approve the updated policy 203.7, board member conflict of interest on the first reading.
Any discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel, yes, Mr. Stocker, Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.04, architect's amendment agreement.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the architect's amendment agreement in the amount of $14,010.
Second.
Any discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel, yes, Mr. Stocker, Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. Lake filed open enrollment request for student A.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion, the board deny the open enroll request for student A.
Any discussion? Vote please.
Mrs. McDaniel, yes, Mr. Stocker,
Yes.
Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. 9.05 again, late file open enrollment request for student B.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Hendricks.
I'd like to make a motion, the board deny the open enroll request for student B.
Any discussion? Vote please.
Mr. Stocker,
Yes.
Mr. Riley,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Houston,
Yes.
Mrs. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mrs. Shuffle.
Yes. Items of interest, future board meetings. Well, first I'd like to welcome Mr. Houston here because this is his official first board meeting in person. Otherwise, I think you were sworn in and right at the beginning of the COVID and we were Zooming and everything, so. So welcome. You knew what we've done, you've been in the board, out in the audience.
Already
so-
fully acclimated.
Yes, yes. Okay, and our next board meeting will be August 17th, 2020, and when is the first day teachers are back?
Let's see, that's the 24th is Monday, it's the Thursday prior. to the
Thursday?
third.
All right.
Fine.
20.
And your teachers are, you're doing before.
Yes.
Okay, anything else?
Did we want to discuss further, last time with the board, I know the board decided to go ahead and try, in-person meetings at 5:30, and you mentioned Daryl wasn't
Right.
here, didn't know. if
Daryl,
that
are
was-
you gonna be able to make 5:30, or is that too early? Maybe? Well, if we, yeah, I was gonna say if we can keep the option of zooming in too, or phone or something. Okay, do you think 5:30 would work though? Does it work for everyone else? Okay,
Yeah, if we're gonna be late, I'll just call in and.
And the board can also always decide at some point if we have any board member that, I think if it's a burden to any board member, more than one time, if it's consecutively, then you
Right.
can rethink it, but if it's predominantly, we try it for a while, and always do it, we could always try it 6, or we could like 6:30,
mhm.
up to the board.
Okay, so for our next meeting on the 17th, we'll do 5:30? Will that work?
Okay.
That work? Yes. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and do that. Anything else? Anything? All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I guess you can say otherwise. Thank you for those who tuned in to us. and-
Well,